Lee Mather, F1 franchise game director at Codemasters. Thanks for speaking with the Inside Line.
Absolute pleasure, thank you.
Well, from what I understand, you've been at Codemasters since 2008 and you've been a long time F1 fan. Tell me firstly about your journey as an F1 fan and then also to becoming the game director at Codemasters.
Yeah, I've always had an obsession with cars and motorsport in general. And obviously when I was a kid, Formula One was the pinnacle. You know, it was the spectacle and the sound of the cars that did it more than anything. So as soon as I was old enough to start going, I'd go to the test days at Silverstone. So I couldn't really afford to go to the Grand Prix. So I'd just go and watch the testing because it was free to go and watch. So that was always absolutely amazing. And I think the first Grand Prix I actually went to was Indianapolis 2003. I know it's a bit random to not even go to the British Grand Prix first. I actually went to Indianapolis and went to the Grand Prix out there. And obviously since then, I've been really lucky with work as well to have the opportunity to attend a significant number of races. And also I had friends who worked at Renault, which gave me great opportunities to spend days with the Renault team and things like that as well. So sort of Silverstone, I can't remember what year it was. I think it was probably 2006, I want to say, I think it was. I got to spend all 3 days of the British Grand Prix as a guest of Renault, and that was absolutely amazing. So it's sort of it's almost a dream come true.
And tell me about your role with Codemasters.
Yes, so I joined Codemasters in 2008 and moved on to the F1 title in 2009. And then since then, obviously, I've worked on the franchise all the way through in design, starting out as an entry-level designer and working my way up to where I currently am now.
Obviously, racing games have been, it's a day and night change. I mean, I remember playing Le Mans and Grand Prix on the Commodore 64, and to see where they've come now, it's an incredible change. And I'm sure behind the scenes, the change has been equally as epic. Can you give me sort of an understanding of the team, the development behind F1 2020?
Yeah, so we have a team that fluctuates in size based on where we are in the development, and we sort of cap out around 120 staff. So it's a very broad team with a pretty wide-reaching skill set. So obviously at Codemasters, pretty much everything we do uses our own tech. So that again that increases the size of the team. So there's also some departments that are company-wide, but I say the F1 team's around 120. So we've obviously got a physics team as well, which a lot of games won't have a physics team the size we have. We've obviously got the environmental art team who do all the track work, and obviously with the detail on the tracks, that's a vast task as well. We always say tracks are the biggest time sink of any task on the entire game. They really do take the longest to do. I think one of the art director will always say, I think it's around a year in man hours to build a racetrack in the game. And obviously since we started back on 2010, we moved into the next generation of consoles when the Xbox One and PS4 came out. So obviously that requires, again, even more resource to bring those tracks up to the standard that you expect to see on that generation of console. And then obviously we've got a very talented AI team. The AI in the game is, I think, some of the best AI in any racing game. And again, that will be seen as improved again in 2020. So again, that's a team that it's quite unique what they do. I think outside of other racing games, the AI having to cope with all of the things that Formula One throw at it, as well as just being able to navigate a circuit. So I think those are sort of disciplines that are quite unique. And then obviously we've got a really wide gameplay code team, huge QA resource. We have a studio out in KL in Kuala Lumpur that also is a Codemasters studio that do some of the track work and some of the car work. And then they come back to our studio in Birmingham and in Southam, where we do more finessing on the cars and making sure they're signed off correctly by the team. So it's a vast task. It's a really large game.
And the results show, for sure. Can you tell me a little bit about the involvement of Liberty Media, the teams, the drivers, the circuits, and the sport at large, and also the challenges that come with that?
Yeah, so that's something that Paul Geel, the franchise director, handles more directly than me. But what we do is we go in and we pitch the ideas for the game to them on a regular basis so they know where we want to take it. Because obviously it's their IP, so they've got to be bought into what we think is right. And obviously they take our guidance on that because this is what we do. We make video games, we understand the market, we know what the fans want. So we have regular meetings set up where we go in and we'll pitch to them what we're doing. So they've got a good idea of what the game's going to be. Obviously, you've probably seen in recent years, their sort of social and digital presence has grown quite significantly, which has obviously helped us significantly because that's obviously the space that we reside in way heavier. It's also great that the market, the fan base for Formula One, it seems to be changing quite a little bit now. So I always consider myself, an old school Formula One fan. I'm of that age where I will remember the Mansell years and the Senna years. And there's obviously an audience now where they're gamers, but they're not necessarily big Formula One fans. And I think we're now introducing them to the sport, and they're starting to see what an exciting sport it is, and how, it's not just a game, it's a game of an amazing sport. So I think the support between Liberty, the teams, the drivers, and ourselves, it's a real partnership now. And as you've seen from the virtual Grand Prix, we're attracting the drivers. We're finally getting the drivers to come and play it. And all it took was just a couple of them to get in a seat and go, oh my God, this is amazing fun. And all of a sudden, that's it, they're in. And they all want in, because as soon as they see a couple of them having fun, I mean, I don't know if you saw the race last night, and that was absolutely astonishing to watch Charles Leclerc and Alexander Albon going at it like that in our game round Brazil. Was absolutely amazing.
Proper driver's track and proper battle, race-long duel, really amazing. Just to sort of go back, we'll swing between subjects here, but how much are you constrained by the consoles that you're running on and add-on sort of setups that the users will use in terms of either sim or controllers or what have you?
Yeah, so there's always going to be constraints no matter what you're running on. You could have the world's most powerful PC, and I'm sure we'd still do something that could push that to the limits. There's always things that people will want to do. Obviously, things such as the tyre model has to be very intelligently done, because that is incredibly intense. The way the physics runs, the amount of damage we do to the cars, all of those things are very costly things to do. So yeah, there's definitely a balancing act in what you can and can't do. And then when it comes to the hardware, we obviously build the game on wheels in the first place. Excuse me. So the cars are set up to drive how we want them to drive on a wheel and pedal setup. Obviously, they vary quite drastically from a £99 wheel setup all the way up to the £25,000, £30,000 sim rigs that you see some of the drivers using. But ultimately, the game can be tailored to suit all of those. The controls are in there and they can be tweaked. And then for players who game on a pad, we layer on a level of assistance and manipulation to the pad inputs, as all racing games do, because ultimately, if you've got 360 degrees rotation on a wheel as opposed to a couple of inches on a thumbstick, you need to do something to make that manageable. So, we balance the game across both.
Obviously, as we were saying, we've seen how incredibly realistic the gameplay is on the virtual Grand Prix that we've seen, as you mentioned, with Brazil yesterday. How is that realism being created? You talked about the physics and the AI, and how do you continue to work on that? And how is that? I mean, it must be a quantum leap from what was done 10 years ago.
Yeah, so I think from a physics perspective, we've been getting good feedback from the drivers, and the more of them that play it, the more feedback we get. So we always work with Anthony Davidson from the very beginning. So Ant always gave us a really good understanding of how a Formula One car should feel and move, and we've continued to build on that ever since. So there's something that we've done in the game this year, which is we've adjusted the way that the ERS is used. And that was based very much on some feedback that Lando Norris gave to us last year at one of the eSports events. So we were at the eSports event, we all went out for a drink later, and he was just chatting about some of the things he thought we should change or look at changing, and he was explaining how the teams program the car's ERS based on the data they collect, and then the drivers essentially just have access to an overtake button, and that's all they have access to when the team allow them that as well. So we've adjusted the way our ERS works now, so that's a programmed system that runs based on the AI, and the player has an overtake button. So it's a simplified system, but it's also more realistic to Formula One. So those are the sorts of things we gain from talking to the drivers. Also, we're always looking at new technology and new ways to simulate tyre models. We're looking at other more extensive real-life sims and see what we can derive from that. Yeah, there's always things we can improve and drive forward. We've recently taken on a guy who previously used to work for Codemasters, funnily enough. Then he went off and did a doctorate. He's now come back and he's now working on some of our physics. And he went away to learn that more intensely and to come back and bring that into the company.
In saying how realistic the games are, obviously a Formula One car realistically is incredibly difficult to drive, let alone race on the limit. How do you balance, for the everyday gamer, how do you balance that fun against the accuracy? Or is it about creating an accurate experience, then putting on guides that can help them step up?
Yeah, so we always take the approach of going as realistic as we're comfortable with and as possible, and then we layer on the elements to make it that little bit easier. So the assists that are in the game obviously will make it easier for somebody who struggles. But some of the feedback we often get from the drivers is they don't consider, I mean, this is obviously because that's their job, they don't consider Formula One cars hard to drive. And it's like, well, I drove one of the team simulators some time ago, and it wasn't as difficult as I expected. But the feedback I got from the engineer was very much, I was one of the anomalies. Most people are in the wall on the first corner. But I think, essentially as you see with the drivers in the eSports and the VGPs, while it's different and it feels very different, the speeds are the same, the gears are the same, the corner, the apex, the turning point, they all work the same. The cars are set up to be a Formula One car. So it's very, very relatable.
Okay. And I spoke with Daniel Ricciardo last year, he was very complimentary about F1 2019. And, in terms of its realism and the track layouts and whatnot. But for example, he said things like, the sort of bumps, the small bumps that F1 drivers would recognize on a track, perhaps the simulator would, but not the game. Is that intentional, or are these the sort of incremental improvements that, for example, Codemasters would look to implement going forward?
Yeah, no, these are very much incremental improvements that we'd like to start looking at making. So we are always looking at refining our tracks. So a lot of them are now, they've been obviously established in the game for some time, but we've now got tracks such as Zandvoort coming in, which we were able to get LiDAR data for. And that's something we're striving to do for as many tracks as we can, moving forward. So we always look to get the best data we can when we start building a track. We do actually, occasionally when drivers do give us feedback like that, we actually look to make those small tweaks. So this year, feedback we had, funnily enough, very recently, one of the drivers was commenting, and I think it was either Max or Orlando commented that the last sector of Catalonia wasn't right. And it's like, well, we knew that, and we've already fixed it. So that's in 2020 is a change to the last sector at Catalonia. We're also aware that we had a bit of a bump onto the pit straight in Suzuka that was a bit more extreme than it should have been. So again, that's something we've rectified. So we're always striving to try and keep the tracks as realistic as possible. And now when we're building new circuits, we always try and start with LiDAR data wherever possible.
Tell me about F1 2020. We know there's the new My Team mode. You can talk me through the game and what fans can expect when it hits the shelves on July 10.
Yeah, so my team is something entirely new for us. It's something we've always had in mind from the very beginning. We've always had this dream of managing a Formula One team and running your own Formula One team. And that's essentially what my team lets you do. You become the 11th team on the grid. So obviously you go through the process of setting up your team. You'll pick the livery. You'll set the colours. You'll set a logo. You'll pick your engine supplier. We obviously being one of the 4 engine suppliers in the sport. You'll then move on to pick a sponsor. In fact, you pick the sponsor first because they obviously set the budget you've got for the engine supplier. And then once you pick your engine supplier, whatever's left, you can then go to the driver market. And your first pick of the driver market is to go and get an F2 driver. So obviously you can pick from a selection of the current F2 grid. You'll have a different selection depending on how many, each time you go in. And then once you get into the career itself, you then have the ability to manage tasks. That is something that, Formula One teams have. So previously in the career in the game, you would upgrade your car. It was quite understandable that as a driver, you have some say in the direction you think the car should go. So you would upgrade the car. In my team, you'll be upgrading the facilities as well. So how those things are delivered is important. But beyond that, we also have a marketing suite. Obviously, you need to have a marketing team because bringing in bigger, better sponsors brings in more money, which helps with the development. We also have an area where you can develop your second driver as well. So there's a sim area in the game. So developing your second driver is important. And all of this is done through a season timeline. And the way that works is you have a period of time between races. So you can allocate what tasks you want your team or the driver or the departments to be doing during that period of time. And obviously there's a finite amount of time, but there's also pros and cons with what you do. So it may be, for example, let's say I've done incredibly well. I've got Lewis Hamilton as my teammate, the dream combination, me and Lewis, just what I would like. And Lewis is requested, there's an option to do some marketing one weekend or during the week. So the marketing team have got a task there for Lewis to do, and the benefits are financial. We gain through the finances. But it may be that there's another department that requires Lewis to do some aero testing. Well, he can't do the aero testing because I've sent him doing that. So the negative is, we've gained some money, but potentially we've slipped back a little bit in development of the car somewhere. So there's a nice balancing act between what you decide to do during that time. So there's a really nice management element that is derived from what the teams do during their time during the week.
You've spoken about the F2 driver as your first driver in that sort of my team mode. Can you tell me about F2's inclusion and how has that section developed in the 2020 game?
Yeah, so F2's back again, obviously, this year. And what we've done this year is we've brought the drivers into the driver market. So once get into the My Team mode, those drivers can actually move into Formula One. But it's not just you that's going to be picking those drivers, because there's an active driver market. You might find that if one of the F2 drivers is doing well, or one of the Formula One drivers is having a particularly bad year, they can come and go. So you'll find that the F2 drivers potentially can make their way into Formula One. So it really just makes the grid up quite interestingly.
You've also got 4 Michael Schumacher cars. Can you tell me a little bit about those 4 cars and how they were brought in, but also generally how you bring those historic cars into the game?
Yeah, that's been a journey. That's really been a journey. So if you'd asked me sort of 10 years ago which cars we wanted in game, the Jordan 191 would have been one of the first cars that I would have asked for, and have repeatedly asked for it year on year. And obviously we've always found that teams that are no longer around, it's notoriously difficult to find who to speak to get the sign off on those assets. So all credit to our licensing department. Every year ask the same question. Every year we'll do our best, and finally we got the opportunity. So the Jordan and the 2 Benettons have always been notoriously difficult to get because the teams are no longer in existence. So there's a lot of the staff still around who worked for them in those days, and they're still essentially the same teams to a degree. But it was very hard to get those. So finally, we're really pleased to have got those. The Ferrari, obviously, we have a great relationship with Ferrari, so adding the F2000 was not a problem. In terms of getting the assets, we actually had the car team go out and take really high detail photography, and also they now have a hand 3D scanner. So when we do get good access to one of the classic cars, they can actually scan it in full 3D at the location where they get to see the car.
Will there be VR support for F1 2020?
So VR's a challenging one for us. This year we added split screen. So it's very difficult. As I mentioned earlier on, the game is very intense. So we're actually maxing out quite a lot of the hardware. So to do VR is a significant leap for Formula One. So we've done this year, we've done the split screen, which in some ways is a similar sort of tech, but obviously works differently on different platforms. So at the moment, it's not planned for 2020.
Obviously, COVID-19 is affecting everyone, let alone the game. How has it affected what you're doing and the game itself?
To be honest, very, very little. There are obviously some areas where we wanted to do something additional that maybe might not happen. It might just be a little bit of extra VO or something where obviously voiceover studios might not be open. But aside from that, we actually started planning for this way in advance of it happening. We still didn't expect it to come about quite as quickly as it did. It was very much, we've probably got another couple of weeks, Monday. It's okay. So, but everybody mobilized really quickly, and the impact has been really negligible.
As we said at the start, it's been great seeing these fantastic battles in the virtual Grands Prix. What's Codemasters' involvement been in that? Have you been involved in the broadcast and in terms of putting it to air?
Yeah, we've been heavily involved from day one. So ever since the very first eSports rounds that we did in 2017, we've always been there on site at every event. We provide the game, but we have the knowledge of the game and the best way to make use of it. So we obviously have the best knowledge of the game. And we have an eSports coordinator who actually helps to run all of the events. So he's responsible for getting people into the lobby, making sure it's all up and running, helping them with hardware setup. I jump in on some of those sometimes and practice with the drivers to give them a bit of extra track time. So we're heavily involved in all of those events. So we attend all of the eSports events down at the Gfinity Arena. Obviously, at the moment, we're running everything remotely. We also, last year, the qualifying rounds, they were all hosted by us. So there were qualifying rounds that ran over the course of the months leading up to the Pro Draft. So they were all run from our broadcast suite in the Southam studio.
Fantastic. And obviously it's in uncharted territory in terms of broadcasting these Grand Prix instead of the races. But it must be a real boost looking forward into the power of esports.
Yeah, I think it's really smashed through some misconceptions people had of it. I think that was probably what was blocking it more than anything. I think anybody who's ever watched any of the races was blown away by it. So, I mean, my parents, obviously, they've got a vested interest in what I do. So they would watch the esports and they loved it. And they just couldn't get over how exciting and how fun it was. And I think people were just sort of put off by it's gaming, it's for kids, and then they watch it and they're like, hang on a second. This is amazing. The racing's really exciting. It looks phenomenal. It's very realistic. So I think we were already on that journey, and that's where we always saw it getting to. When you look at when we started in 2017 with the first of the esports, it's grown massively year on year. The talent it's brought in, the people who want to attend the events, the level of coverage it's been getting across the media has grown every year. But this has sort of just accelerated that program ridiculously. And I think now, hopefully, people understand just how good it is, how much fun it is, and it'll continue to build even once all this weirdness is over.
In terms of other features of F1 2020, is there anything that we haven't covered that potentially fans and patrons will be interested in once they buy the game?
Yeah, I think, we touched a little bit upon how it's quite difficult to drive a Formula One car. I mean, I always liken driving a Formula One car to a motorbike game in that you arrive at a corner and if you're not set up for the corner, you're not going to make it. It's pretty simple. The tipping point on a bike obviously is very important. So the turning point on a Formula One car at those speeds is equally so. So we've worked on accessibility this year as well. So for players who, as I was saying, love Formula One, but maybe can't play a racing game so effectively, we've added a more casual setting that actually strips away some of the hardcore stuff. So the game, you can still play it exactly as you normally would. We've still got all of the hardcore options there that everybody can play with. But we've added in a casual setting, which not only strips away some of the options to simplify and take away, the stresses and the, oh my God, what do I change next? But also adds in a steering assist. So the game assists you in your steering, which is amazing for somebody who arrives at most corners and goes straight into the gravel. It's a really great way to teach them circuits. We've also simplified the off-track surfaces because, again, we've watched people play our game quite a lot. We do a lot of focus testing and user testing. And you see people get in the gravel and they spin round and they get frustrated. So we wanted to remove that friction. So now you can drive on the off-track areas. And we've also added in, automatic DRS, automatic ERS, things that will allow players who maybe aren't the world's biggest racing game fans or players, but they are Formula One fans, to be able to enjoy a Formula One game just as much as the rest of us.
That's fantastic. Really it makes it accessible for the casual fan. Finally, Can you tell me about some long lead projects looking towards F1 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, so at the moment, obviously, all of our focus is on F1 2020. I've obviously got an eye on the future, and we've always had a plan, where we want to take the game. We do make adjustments year on year, but we do have a roadmap mapped out of what we want to do with the game.
Lee Mather, thanks very much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching. To stay up to speed on all things Formula One, make sure you hit the subscribe button.